The Assad regime fell, and what we know about what's happened was a little unclear yesterday. For example, there were some news reports about how his plane went down or that he was in Moscow, but no, he's in Syria. But we're going to try to clarify everything that's happened for you and help you make some sense of what happened and then some lessons as we move forward and think about what's going on in Ukraine. Okay, this is tender. The collapse of the Assad regime for Russia is a far worse catastrophe than most realize. It will take me many posts, and you will see more and more like this in the coming days and weeks. Here, I will show you the implications on Africa. As it is well known, one of Russia's business models is to prop up dictatorships and putschist regimes around the globe, including Africa, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Central African Republic are just a few to name of. The Sudanese civil war is even directly kept on fire by Russia. In exchange for Russia's help to prop up those scourge regimes across Africa, Wagner received direct control of lucrative deals for mining operations, especially gold and blood diamonds. However, logistically, Russia always relied on the Syrian bases to fly out their riches and fly in mercenaries. Now, that does make things problematic, but they'll figure out a way around this. They'll probably, I would imagine Sudan is becoming far more desirable as a location to, because that's going to be the closest potential base out here, although Syria would be very useful. Now, Syria also gave them a port, and that was important, but I think they'll figure out a way around that. That's not the big thing. Now, here's a little, some images and some thoughts about what's happened here so far. $15 million Russian Panzer S destroyed this afternoon on the outskirts of Damascus. So Tender says that after more than 13 years of meticulously following the Syrian war, hopefully this is the last time I have to post a Syrian control map. All right, Darth Putin. So it turns out the rebels with no air force, no long-range weapons, are the ones who can capture a country in 3 days. I remain a master strategist. Okay, now we knew that something was going very, very badly for Assad when we saw things like this. Damascus radio and television stations under control of Syrian freedom fighters. We've reached the last stage of the revolution. And then you saw it announced on TV that Assad has fled. And then we saw confirmation that Russian Mediterranean flotilla ships were fleeing their Syrian port of Tartus. The Russian Navy frigate Admiral Grigorovich escorted a cargo ship out of port this morning. Additionally, the GUR reports that Russian forces are departing Latika. Okay, so the Russians are getting out of Dodge. And then we saw this. Reuters was citing 2 Syrian security sources and said it was very likely that the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, was killed in a plane crash near Homs last night. The plane, which had taken off from Damascus International Airport, was believed to have been shot down. It was a mystery why the plane took a surprise U-turn and then disappeared off the map, according to the data from Flight Radar website. Well, it was reported here and it was reported here, and you saw 3D images of open source data available on the plane reportedly carrying Bashar, and it looks like it was high enough and then started going lower, 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 lower. And then here it is in Reuters, carried by UATV in English. The outlet specifies that the plane initially flew toward the coastal region of Syria, where Assad supporters and Russian bases are located, but then sharply turned and flew in the opposite direction for several minutes before disappearing from the radar. The plane was at an altitude of 500 meters. Reuters was unable to confirm who was on board, but it is believed that it was Assad. Well, then we find out that Bashar al-Assad and his family have fled to Moscow, and Russia has granted him asylum. So what's going on? HUR reports that rumors of Assad's plane being shot down over Syria last night were Russian disinformation aimed at concealing their operation to evacuate the former dictator and his inner circle. So it worked. Now, I said this, I posted this when I saw it, and I said, hey, this might have happened. We don't know yet, fog of war. It looks like he might have. We don't know. Maybe he fled. Maybe he's there. Maybe this happened. But yeah, that's a clever disinformation campaign. I got to hand it to him. Meanwhile, Syrian protesters had ripped apart the Iranian embassy in Damascus. And remember, Iran has used the Syrian bases in order to train Hezbollah fighters. Okay, the brutal Bashar al-Assad dictatorship fell in Syria in just 11 days. 10 if you're counting it differently, but okay. It was sudden and unexpected after a 24-year reign starting in 2000. His father ruled the nation from 1971 to 2000, given this development, Putin cannot be feeling comfortable about his own fate. So they're cheering, the people are out there in force. They are glad that this is over. Now, it's an open question to see what's going to happen next, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Syrians ride on a toppled statue of Assad in the city of Latika. Okay, I think that's Assad's father that's a statue, but either way, that's where they are and their jubilance about the Assad regime falling. Okay, this gentleman posted no killing, no airstrikes, no starvation, no injuries, no sieges, no loss of our loved ones or ourselves. The killer is gone. I'm hysterical for hours with no sleep. I'm unable to process this, unable to grasp that Syria, our Syria, is free. Our country is ours again. That's the kind of sentiment that Syrians are feeling right now. So here's some lessons to draw. The Astana deal in Syria failed and prolonged the suffering. That's a deal that held this together for the last few years. Just like the Minsk deal in Ukraine failed and prolonged suffering. You don't negotiate it with a dictator, you defeat them, and then tell whatever is left to leave, and they'll leave, and that's it. They only understand force. Some lessons from Anton Gerashenko. Here, Syria, Turkey has emerged as the primary beneficiary of the regime change in Syria. The current task is now to stabilize the country. The United States retains control over its zone, no other parties challenging it. Iran was one of the most active participants in the conflict, supporting the war effort through its proxies, such as Hezbollah, until the very end. Notably, the Iranian foreign minister visited Ankara, that's the capital of Turkey, immediately after the fall of Aleppo. They kind of knew what was happening. Arab monarchies, paradoxically, they are likely to strengthen their position. Russia, however, is losing influence, although it retains a chance to remain in Syria. Depends on what the negotiation is with their bases or that sort of thing. I hope they don't stay. Thus, the contours of a new government will largely be shaped by Ankara, that is Turkey. If the Russian military bases in Syria are evacuated, it will complicate Russian operations in Africa, but not render them impossible. It's just more difficult. Now, the main issue moving forward, and I'm not going to address that here, will be gas pipelines, because rerouting gas pipelines from this region out through Turkey into Europe is going to be a game changer for most of Europe. Okay, why Assad's regime is collapsing so quickly? Nobody was noticing Syria's regime was increasingly hollowing out. You see, so this article, when you go into it in the FP, Foreign Policy, it's really interesting. It was hollowing out just like what was happening in Russia, and we didn't realize just how hollowed out things were in, like, say, the Russian military until they were trying to take on Ukraine and realize, wow, they have very bad kit and they're not trained properly, and millions of dollars that were supposed to have done this thing or that thing did not do this thing or that thing. Okay, Syria's economy has been in shambles for years. When a ceasefire agreed to by Turkey and Russia, which backed opposing sides, froze the conflict lines in early 2020, $1 was worth approximately 1,150 Syrian pounds. As the opposition offensive began a week ago, it was worth 14,750 Syrian pounds. That's how bad the inflation was. Rather than stabilizing the country and offering Syria's civilians some respite after more than a decade of war, Syria's humanitarian crisis has spiraled since the agreement was reached in 2020, with the United Nations reporting that at least 90% of Syrians now live under the poverty line. Yeah, that's what happened after the agreement. Be careful for those of you who are saying an agreement with Russia, oh, it's better to just stop the fighting. This is the kind of thing that will happen if you're not careful. A little bit more celebrating the fall of Assad's regime. What do you think it'll be like when Putin's regime falls? Do you think that Russians will celebrate? I mean, I know that Putin's thinking about this right now. So the lesson here is that Putin's regime can crumble as quickly as Assad's. Escalation management is appeasement by another name. So the question is, why does the West keep appeasing Putin? But now we have to go on and think about what's the next step. Now you're going to hear William Spaniel, and as he's talking, think about, while you're hearing about what's going to have to happen in Syria, think about what's going to have to happen in Ukraine.
And thus, the loser's inability to credibly commit to retire from rebellion causes the winner's inability to credibly commit to not jailing or executing the loser's leadership. But this creates an interesting tension. A war can reach a point where the soldiers do not care enough to continue the fight, despite the insistence of leadership. In Syria, this moment arrived rapidly. Once it became clear that Russia's distractions in Ukraine meant that the Kremlin was not going to help prop up Assad, and once Israel solved the other half of the problem by neutering Hezbollah, and therefore making that group physically incapable of helping, his troops also lost interest in the battle.
Okay, so Hezbollah was basically put out of action by Israel. Russia couldn't really help Assad, and so the green light was there for the rebels in order to move forward.
And that is how you go from this to this in 10 days. So, credible commitment problems causing a rapid end to the war. Check. The Russia part of this was a double whammy, though. The typical way to resolve credible commitment issues is to have a third-party enforcer guarantee the terms. That way,
now, we don't want to just think about third-party enforcers in Syria. What third-party enforcer could guarantee the terms in Ukraine moving forward? The US, UK, and Russia were supposed to guarantee the borders with the Budapest Memorandum before, but that failed. So who's strong enough or has enough will to actually do this now? There's only NATO. That's the only option.
one side can lay down its arms and still rest assured that the war's winner will not exploit them. The third-party enforcer would step in under such circumstances, which deters any attempted exploitation in the first place. However, that presupposes that such a third-party enforcer exists. Any country wanting to play that role must be 1. Strong enough to crush any violation of the terms, 2. Have the spare military capacity to deploy to the region, 3. Have the political will to do it, and 4. Actually want to prop up the protected side. That last bit prevents, say, the United States from fulfilling such a role for Assad. Western powers would rather see him head to The Hague and await trial. Consequently, for the Assad regime, only Russia had the ability to be such a hypothetical enforcer.
But when Russia couldn't do it anymore, it all fell apart because Russia spread too thin. All right. Just a few years ago, Assad won the elections with 95% of the vote, and today there's mass celebrations in the street of Aleppo and other Syrian cities and villages. Assad's regime fell overnight. This is a good lesson for Putin. Authoritarian regimes fall. That's right. Now, this I thought was very funny. Somebody posted this. You knew that al-Assad was too soft to survive when he only gave himself 95% in the last election. Saddam showed how it's done. And here's this 2021 Syrian presidential election. Bashar al-Assad earned 95.19% of the vote. Well, of course, it was all rigged. And he was comparing that to Saddam Hussein, who in 2002 gave himself 100% of the vote. See, that shows that the people really support you. All right, Gary Kasparov, the price of inaction is compounding even today as the US and NATO nations make similar mistakes in Ukraine. Putin learned, Western leaders did not. 10 needless years of slaughter. Godspeed to the Syrian people today. And he's showing an article that he wrote back in July of 2013. Putin toys with Obama as Syria burns and Snowden runs free. Again, this is July 2nd of 2013. It didn't have to go on this long. And just to wrap up, Darth Putin said Assad's in deep poop. Trump meets with Zelensky wearing pro-Ukraine colors. I'm being betrayed from all sides. I remain a master strategist. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. I hope this helped you understand what happened in Syria and what will have to happen in any peace deal going forward in Ukraine. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.